Millionaire didn't know he had 4 children until he met them at his wife's funeral. A successful man attends his late wife's farewell, only to be confronted by 4 orphaned girls whose eyes hold the secret of a hidden past. In that heart-wrenching moment, the unimaginable truth shatters his world. How could a life so full of mystery exist right under his nose? What happens when a man is forced to face a family he never knew, with decisions that will forever change his life? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning air bit through Daniel's wool coat as he stepped out of the black town car. Gray clouds hung low, matching the somber mood that had drawn him to this quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town. His polished shoes crunched against the frost-covered grass as he made his way between the rows of headstones, each step measured and deliberate. The cemetery stretched out before him, a peaceful expanse dotted with monuments and markers. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he walked, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. The tailored suit beneath felt constraining, much like the emotions he was struggling to contain. He found her headstone easily, simple, elegant white marble that seemed to glow even in the dim morning light. The engraving was clear and precise: Elise Marin Hart. Daniel stood motionless, taking in the sight of her name carved in stone. It felt surreal, like a dream he couldn't wake from. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a single white rose, its petals still perfect despite the cold. He'd chosen it carefully that morning, remembering how Elise had always preferred simple, elegant things. The flower trembled slightly in his grip as he bent to lay it against the cold stone. "Goodbye, Elise," he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he could manage past the tightness in his throat. "What are you doing here?" The sharp question cut through his private moment. Daniel straightened slowly, turning to face the voice behind him. 4 teenage girls stood there, watching him with expressions ranging from confusion to suspicion. They were dressed in black, their faces pale in the gray morning light. The eldest of the group, a tall girl with familiar dark hair, stood slightly ahead of the others. She had asked the question, and her stance suggested she expected an answer. There was something in her features that made Daniel's chest tighten, a ghost of recognition he couldn't quite place. "This is my wife's grave," he replied quietly, his voice steady, despite the turmoil rising within him. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. The girls exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock, and then to something more complex. The eldest girl's face paled further, her hands clenching at her sides. "She was our mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, making him take half a step backward. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. The girls huddled closer together, their eyes never leaving his face, searching for what? Recognition? Denial? He wasn't sure he could offer either. Before anyone could speak again, a gentle voice called from nearby. "Girls, the reception is starting." A priest in traditional black clothing stood at the edge of a white tent set up some distance away, his expression kind but concerned as he took in the scene before him. The girls hesitated, then turned as one and walked toward the tent, casting backward glances at Daniel as they went. He remained rooted to the spot, watching them disappear into the gathering of mourners. The service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers, with Daniel standing at the very back of the congregation, his mind racing with questions he couldn't voice. As the crowd began to disperse, the priest approached him, carrying a wooden box that showed signs of age and careful handling. "Mr. Hart," the priest said softly, extending the box toward him. "Elise left these in my care." There are 5 letters inside. One is marked for you." Daniel accepted the box with trembling hands. It was lightweight, but felt impossibly heavy with the weight of secrets it contained. The wood was smooth, worn in places where hands had touched it over the years. A simple brass clasp held it closed. Back in his car, Daniel sat in the quiet darkness of the back seat, the letter marked for Daniel in his hands. Elise's handwriting was as familiar as his own, elegant and precise, just as she had been. The paper was high quality, the envelope sealed with care. His fingers traced the edges of the envelope as the driver pulled away from the curb. The cemetery receded behind them, taking with it the 4 girls who had upended his world with 3 simple words. Through the window, he watched the gray sky grow darker with approaching rain. Finally, with hands that weren't quite steady, he broke the seal and opened the envelope. The paper inside was covered in Elise's distinctive script, the ink still dark against the cream-colored page. As he unfolded the letter, his eyes fell on the first lines. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you finally met our daughters. I know you must have so many questions, and you deserve answers. The truth I've kept hidden for nearly 20 years begins with the day I discovered I was carrying triplets, just weeks after your heart attack." Daniel's estate stood silent in the gathering darkness, its stone walls holding back the chill of the evening. Inside his study, shadows danced across dark wood panels as he moved with practiced steps toward the crystal decanter that caught the firelight. The whiskey poured amber and smooth into the heavy glass, but his usual precise movements were slightly unsteady. He lowered himself into the leather armchair beside the crackling fireplace, the letter from the wooden box still clutched in his left hand. The paper had grown soft at the creases where he'd folded and unfolded it during the car ride home, unable to read past those first few lines. Now, in the warm glow of the fire, Daniel took a slow sip of whiskey and carefully smoothed the pages across his knee. Elise's handwriting flowed across the paper, as familiar as her voice had once been in these rooms. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you finally met our daughters. I know you must have so many questions, and you deserve answers. The truth I've kept hidden for nearly 20 years begins with the day I discovered I was carrying triplets, just weeks after your heart attack. First, you need to know that every choice I made, every secret I kept, came from a place of absolute love. You were my heart, Daniel, from the moment we met until my last breath. That never changed, even when everything else had to. Do you remember that spring morning when I told you I'd lost the baby? You held me while I cried, and I've carried the weight of that lie every day since. But I had no choice. The day before, Dr. Richardson had taken me aside after your follow-up appointment. He told me the truth about your condition, that any severe emotional shock could trigger another cardiac event, one you might not survive. I was carrying 3 babies, Daniel. 3 precious lives that would have brought you such joy, but that joy might have killed you. I couldn't risk losing you. I couldn't bear the thought of our children growing up with no father at all. So I made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I arranged to visit my sister, but instead went to a small coastal town where I'd found a midwife named June Rowley. She helped me bring our girls into the world and agreed to care for them while I built a life that could encompass both worlds, yours and theirs. The pattern repeated itself 3 more times over the years. Each time, I crafted careful stories, caring for my dying aunt, mentoring troubled teens, weekend volunteering at coastal shelters. You never questioned my absences because you trusted me completely. Your trust was both a blessing and a burden I carried. I split my time between 2 lives. In yours, I was the devoted wife, maintaining the calm, stress-free environment you needed to stay healthy. In theirs, I was a mother who appeared and disappeared like the tide, leaving letters, recordings, and small gifts to bridge the gaps. June became their constant, their anchor, while I moved between worlds trying to hold everything together. Every business trip you took became precious time with them. Every charity event I organized was carefully scheduled around their milestones. I have journals full of their first words, first steps, first heartbreaks, moments I couldn't share with you but couldn't bear to lose. The girls grew up knowing about you, knowing they were loved by both parents, even if one had to love them from afar. I told them stories about their father, your kindness, your integrity, your strength. They know you weren't absent by choice. They know you would have moved heaven and earth to be with them if you'd known. I know this truth will hurt you, my love. The weight of these lost years might feel unbearable. But please understand, you weren't absent. You just weren't allowed to break. Your heart needed to keep beating, not just for you, but for all of us. I chose to carry this burden alone because the alternative was unthinkable. The oldest girls are Rachel, Sarah, and Rebecca, our triplets. They're 17 now, each so different yet so clearly yours. Rachel has your quiet intensity, Sarah your strategic mind, and Rebecca your rare but wonderful laugh. Hannah, our youngest at 15, has your eyes and your gift for seeing straight to the heart of things. They're all in the packet June will give you. Photos, school records, medical histories. Everything you need to know about the daughters who have carried half your heart their whole lives without your knowing it. I'm so sorry, Daniel. Sorry for the years you missed. Sorry for the weight of this truth. Sorry that I had to leave before I could help you all find your way to each other. But I'm not sorry for keeping you alive. I'm not sorry for protecting the father of my children, the love of my life, the man who made every sacrifice worthwhile. All my love, always, Elise. Daniel's hands trembled as he lowered the last page. The whiskey sat untouched, amber liquid reflecting firelight. His chest felt too tight, his throat too thick to swallow. The words on the pages blurred as he stared at them, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Elise had done, had endured, for so many years. He pressed the letter to his chest, feeling the paper crinkle against his heart. The same heart that had caused all of this, too weak to handle joy, too fragile to bear the weight of fatherhood. The fire crackled and sparked, casting dancing shadows across the study walls as evening deepened into night. Hours passed. The fire burned lower, from bright flames to glowing embers. Still Daniel sat, motionless except for his breathing, the letter clutched against him like a lifeline. His mind played through every absence, every trip, every time Elise had slipped away to be with their daughters. The calendar of his memory rearranged itself, filling in blanks he'd never known existed. Sleep didn't come that night. He couldn't close his eyes, couldn't risk losing a single moment to dreams when reality had become so vast, so overwhelming. The fire died to ash, and still he sat, holding the paper that had changed everything, watching darkness give way to the first pale light of dawn. The morning sun filtered through the study's heavy curtains, casting long shadows across Daniel's desk. He sat surrounded by carefully preserved newspaper clippings spanning 2 decades, photos of Elise at charity events, business functions, and garden parties. Her smile remained constant in each image, betraying nothing of the weight she carried. Daniel picked up a silver pen, its weight familiar in his hand. The expensive stationery before him remained blank despite an hour of contemplation. How does one begin to bridge 20 years of absence? He started writing, his usual precise handwriting appearing stiff and formal. Dear Rachel, Sarah, Rebecca, and Hannah, I hope this letter finds you well. In light of recent revelations regarding our connection, I would like to request a meeting to discuss. He stopped, crumpling the paper with uncharacteristic frustration. The corporate letterhead and formal tone felt wrong, too cold, too distant. He pulled a fresh sheet forward, this time choosing plain paper. His pen hovered again, but this time he forced himself to write simply, as if speaking. I'd like to speak with you, just once. No expectations. He studied the few lines, fighting the urge to tear this one up too. It wasn't eloquent or carefully crafted, but perhaps that made it more honest. He folded the note carefully, sliding it into a plain envelope. The priest's office was quiet when Daniel arrived, morning light streaming through stained glass windows. Father Michael didn't seem surprised to see him. Without comment, he wrote an address on a slip of paper, a modest rental house on the outskirts of town. Daniel's driver navigated the unfamiliar residential streets, far from the manicured lawns of his usual route. The rental house sat on a corner lot, its paint fading but its small garden well tended. A woman in her 60s, June, he presumed, was working among the flowers, her silver hair caught in a practical braid. She straightened as the car stopped, watching with careful eyes as Daniel stepped out. He could feel the weight of her assessment, decades of protective care evident in her stance. "Mr. Hart," she said simply, neither welcoming nor dismissing. "Ms. Rowley." He inclined his head slightly. "I have letters. From Elise. For the girls." June's expression softened slightly at Elise's name. She nodded toward the house. "They're inside." Daniel walked the short path to the front door, each step measured and deliberate. Before he could knock, the door opened. A tall girl with Elise's dark hair stood in the doorway, her posture defensive. Ava. He remembered from the photos in Elise's letter. Not one of the triplets, but the eldest at 18. Her eyes held the same sharp intelligence as her mother's, but none of the warmth. "What do you want?" Her tone was carefully neutral, but her crossed arms spoke volumes. "These belong to you." He held out the wooden box containing Elise's letters. "And this." He added his own simple note on top. Ava took the box without stepping closer, her movements precise and controlled. "Is that all?" Daniel nodded, already turning back to his car. "I'll wait, in case you want to talk." He settled into the back seat, watching through tinted windows as Ava disappeared inside. The minutes stretched long and heavy. June continued working in her garden, occasionally glancing toward the car. Inside the house, he could imagine the scene unfolding. 4 girls opening letters in their mother's familiar handwriting. 4 different reactions to the truth they contained. He remembered his own shock, his own struggle to absorb Elise's explanations. The front door opened again after nearly an hour. The girls spilled out onto the porch, their voices carrying across the quiet yard. Even through the car's windows, he could hear their argument. "He's been here all this time." That was Ava, her voice sharp with hurt. "Living in his mansion while Mom struggled." "You didn't read it properly," one of the triplets responded. "Sarah, maybe." Mom said he didn't know. She chose not to tell him. Because he was too fragile to handle it. Ava's laugh held no humor. "What kind of father figure is that?" "Girls." June's quiet voice cut through their debate. She stood from her gardening, brushing dirt from her hands. "Your mother made her choices. She trusted him enough to leave those letters, to want this connection." "We don't need him," Ava insisted. "Maybe not," June agreed. "But your mother wanted you to know him. Just a weekend. That's all she's asking." Silence fell over the group. Daniel kept his gaze forward, giving them privacy to decide. The sun was setting when he heard footsteps on the gravel. Looking up, he saw all 4 girls standing at the curb, small overnight bags in hand. He stepped out and opened the car door without a word. One by one, they slid into the spacious back seat. Ava last, her jaw set in a determined line. The drive to his estate passed in complete silence. No one commented on the manicured grounds or the impressive facade as they pulled through the gates. The weight of 20 years of secrets hung heavy in the air between them. Daniel watched in the rear-view mirror as the girls took in their surroundings. The younger ones tried to hide their awe at the mansion's grandeur. Ava kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to be impressed. The car came to a stop at the front steps. Still, no one spoke. 20 years of absence couldn't be bridged with words, not yet. For now, their presence in the same space would have to be enough. The car crunched to a stop on the circular driveway, gravel shifting beneath its wheels. Through the windows, Daniel's estate rose before them, a sprawling Georgian mansion with pristine white columns reaching toward the darkening sky. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined the path to the front door, their shapes precise and elegant. In the fading light, flower beds burst with careful arrangements of color, a testament to meticulous planning. The youngest girl, Lily, pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's like a castle," she whispered, unable to contain her awe despite the tension. Ava shot her a warning look but couldn't stop her own eyes from taking in the grandeur. The formal gardens stretched out on either side of the main path, and something in their design caught her attention. The flowing curves, the artistic placement of colors. It wasn't the rigid symmetry she'd expected from someone like Daniel. "Your mother designed these gardens," Daniel said quietly, noting Ava's gaze. She had a gift for combining structure with natural beauty. Sarah, one of the triplets, shifted in her seat. "Mom never mentioned she was a gardener." "She was many things," Daniel replied, his voice carrying a weight of discovery that matched their own. The driver opened their doors, and the girls stepped out one by one, clutching their overnight bags like shields. The evening air carried the sweet scent of jasmine from climbing vines that wrapped around the pillars, another of Elisa's touches. Daniel led them through heavy wooden doors into a foyer that seemed to stretch upward forever, a crystal chandelier casting warm light across marble floors. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space as he guided them up a curved staircase to the second floor. "I've had rooms prepared," he said, stopping at the first of 4 doors along a wide hallway. "Each one has its own bathroom. Please make yourselves comfortable." He opened the first door, revealing a spacious bedroom decorated in soft blues and creams. On the bed lay a carefully wrapped package tied with a silver ribbon. Similar gifts waited in each room as he showed them down the hall, each space slightly different in color and style, but all carrying the same welcoming warmth. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," Daniel said, stepping back. "The living room is downstairs to the left when you're ready." He paused, then added, "No pressure. Join if you'd like." The girls disappeared into their rooms, doors closing with soft clicks. Daniel stood for a moment in the empty hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of movement behind the doors. Then he headed downstairs to check on dinner. An hour later, the smell of garlic and herbs filled the house. Daniel stood in his kitchen, sleeves rolled up as he stirred a pot of homemade pasta sauce, his one reliable culinary skill. He'd learned it years ago, watching Elise create the recipe through careful experimentation. Footsteps on the stairs announced the girls' arrival. They filtered into the living room uncertainly, taking seats on the plush sofas. Lily clutched a small stuffed rabbit, the gift from her room. The others had left their packages unopened. "Dinner's ready," Daniel called softly, carrying a large bowl of pasta to the dining room. "It's nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread." The girls moved to the table, all except Ava, who remained firmly planted on the sofa. "I'm not hungry," she announced, though her stomach betrayed her with a quiet growl. Daniel set the food down without comment. The others served themselves, the clink of silverware the only sound in the room. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until Lily spoke up. "Did Mom ever eat here?" she asked, twirling pasta around her fork. Daniel paused, memories washing over him. "Yes, once. Years ago." He didn't elaborate on how it had been their last dinner together before everything changed. Before she left for what she'd said was a healing retreat after losing their baby, the first of many carefully constructed stories. The silence returned, heavier now with unspoken questions. Daniel rose and moved to an antique record player in the corner. After a moment of consideration, he selected an album and placed the needle carefully on the vinyl. Soft jazz filled the room, the melody both melancholic and sweet. Sarah's head snapped up, recognition flooding her features. "Mom used to play this," she said softly, "on Sunday mornings while she made pancakes." Daniel nodded, returning to his seat. He didn't mention how Elise had danced to this same album in this very room, how she'd tried to teach him but laughed at his stiff movements. He simply listened as the familiar notes filled the space between them. The meal continued quietly, the music providing a gentle buffer against the awkwardness. Even Ava seemed to relax slightly, though she maintained her position on the sofa. When the plates were cleared and the girls had retreated to their rooms, Daniel remained in his study, listening to the house settle around its new occupants. Later that night, long after the last door had closed upstairs, Daniel moved quietly through the darkened hallway. In his hands, he carried a tray with 4 steaming mugs of chamomile tea, the kind Elise had always made when sleep proved elusive. He set each mug carefully outside the girls' doors, a silent offering of comfort. He paused at each door, listening for any signs of distress, but heard only the quiet sounds of sleep. At Ava's door, he hesitated longest, remembering the hurt and anger in her eyes. Finally, he placed the last mug and retreated to his own room. Morning light was just beginning to creep through the windows when Daniel made his way back upstairs. 3 full mugs sat untouched outside their doors, but outside Lily's room, an empty cup rested on its saucer. A small smile touched Daniel's lips as he collected the cups, carrying them quietly back to the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the tall kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the marble countertops. Daniel stood at the stove, a look of intense concentration on his face as he attempted to crack eggs into a bowl. The first one shattered, pieces of shell dropping into the yolk. He fished them out carefully with a spoon, his movements precise but unpracticed. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made him pause. Lily appeared first, her hair still messy from sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit from the night before. She watched Daniel's clumsy attempts at breakfast with curious eyes. "Would you like some help?" she offered, padding over to the counter. "Mom taught me how to make scrambled eggs." Daniel handed her the egg carton with a grateful smile. "Please, I'm afraid cooking wasn't something I learned properly." Lily took an egg in each hand, tapping them gently against the bowl's edge and splitting them perfectly. No shells. She worked with quiet confidence, adding a splash of milk and a pinch of salt just as Elise had shown her. Mira appeared next, her book from last night tucked under her arm. She slid onto a kitchen stool, watching her sister work. The kitchen filled with the sound of eggs sizzling and toast popping up from the toaster that Daniel managed to operate without incident. "There's orange juice in the fridge," Daniel offered, setting out glasses. "And I think I saw some jam somewhere." He rummaged through cabinets until Celine appeared in the doorway, hesitating before joining her sisters at the counter. Her eyes were slightly red, as if she hadn't slept well. "The raspberry jam is in the door of the fridge," she said quietly. "Mom always kept it there too." Daniel paused, then opened the refrigerator door. Sure enough, there sat a jar of raspberry jam exactly where Celine had said. He placed it on the counter without comment, but his hand lingered on the jar for a moment. Lily served up plates of perfectly scrambled eggs, and they ate in what felt like a slightly less tense silence than the night before. The empty chair at the end of the counter seemed to grow larger with each passing minute, Ava's absence like a physical presence in the room. Finally, Celine spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was she like? When you were together?" Daniel set down his fork, considering the question carefully. "She was full of unexpected moments. She loved thunderstorms. When it would rain at night, she'd go out onto the back terrace and dance barefoot. No music, just the sound of the rain. I used to watch from the window, thinking she looked like something out of a dream. The girls absorbed this new piece of their mother, this version they'd never known." Lily pushed her eggs around her plate, trying to picture Elise dancing in the rain. Mira's hand tightened around her book. After breakfast, the girls drifted through the house like curious ghosts, opening doors and running fingers along bookshelves. Daniel gave them space, retreating to his study to make some calls. In a sunny room overlooking the garden, they found it. A beautiful grand piano, its black surface gleaming as if it had been polished yesterday. Celine lifted the lid reverently, revealing pristine ivory keys. "She never told us she had a piano here," she whispered, pressing one key. The note rang pure and clear, perfectly in tune. In the library, Mira discovered a well-worn copy of Jane Eyre, tucked between leather-bound classics. Opening it, she found familiar handwriting filling the margins. Elise's neat script commenting on passages, asking questions, leaving thoughts like breadcrumbs through the pages. Near the end, one note caught her eye. "Let them have the quiet I never had." Mira traced the words with her finger, wondering what her mother had meant. Lily wandered into what must have been Elise's study, where afternoon light spilled across an antique desk. Photos in silver frames lined the walls, moments frozen in time. One in particular made her stop. It showed Daniel and Elise on a beach, their hair windblown, genuine smiles on their faces. Elise wore a flowing sundress that barely concealed the secret growing within her. Daniel's arm was around her waist, oblivious to the truth hidden beneath his hand. "That was taken in Maine," Daniel's voice came from the doorway, making Lily jump. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I was just looking for some paperwork." Lily carefully set the photo back on its shelf, not mentioning what she'd noticed about her mother's appearance in it. Daniel moved to his desk, giving her space to slip out of the room. As evening settled over the house, soft piano notes began drifting through the halls. Daniel stepped out of his study, following the sound. He recognized the simple melody, "Heart and Soul," played slowly and carefully by unpracticed hands. Standing in the shadows of the hallway, he listened as Mira worked through the tune, occasionally hitting wrong notes but continuing on. The music floated through the house like a visitor from the past, familiar yet changed. Like everything else in this new reality they were all trying to navigate. Daniel stood perfectly still, not wanting to interrupt the moment. The melody continued, growing more confident with each measure, filling the spaces between what was and what could be. The morning brought a steady rain that drummed against the windows of the estate. Droplets cascaded down the glass panes in irregular patterns, creating a gentle symphony that filled the quiet house. In the garden, partially sheltered from the weather, Ava sat alone in the white wooden gazebo, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Her pencil moved across the paper with quick, precise strokes, capturing the way the rain transformed the carefully maintained garden into something wild and mysterious. Water dripped from the gazebo's ornate trim, creating a curtain of silver that separated her from the rest of the world, just the way she liked it. The sound of footsteps on wet gravel made her tense, but she didn't look up. She could tell by the measured pace who it was. Daniel appeared through the rain, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Without a word, he placed one beside her on the gazebo's wooden bench. The rich aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the petrichor hanging in the air. Ava's pencil stopped moving, but her eyes remained fixed on her sketch. "Don't," she said, her voice tight. "Don't pretend this is normal." Daniel didn't sit down. He didn't try to look at her drawing or make small talk about the weather. He stood there, coffee in hand, watching the rain fall on his garden, the one Elise had designed years ago. "You have your mother's silence," he said finally, his voice soft but clear above the rainfall. It always said more than words. The pencil in Ava's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't respond. Daniel took a sip of his coffee and walked back toward the house, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the untouched mug beside her. Inside, the other girls had discovered something in one of the storage closets, an old camcorder with a stack of labeled tapes. Celine held one up, reading the faded label aloud. 2008. Elise. They huddled together in the living room, connecting the camcorder to the television with shaking hands. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly there she was. Elise, younger and radiant, her belly swollen with pregnancy. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. "This is for you," she said to the camera, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Someday." The girls watched, transfixed, as the footage jumped forward. Now, Elise was holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Her face was tired but glowing with love as she gazed down at the newborn. "Ava, your father would have loved you," Elise whispered to the sleeping baby, her voice catching. "But he can't know. He can't know." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Celine's quiet sobs. Mira reached forward with trembling fingers and pressed the stop button. The screen went black, but Elise's words hung in the air like smoke. "Why did she lie to him?" Lily asked, her young voice full of confusion and hurt. "Why didn't she just tell him?" Before anyone could answer, they heard footsteps in the doorway. Daniel stood there, his clothes slightly damp from the rain. He must have seen enough to understand what they'd found. The girls turned to face him, their expressions a mix of accusation and uncertainty. "Did you really not know?" Celine asked, wiping tears from her cheeks. "All those years, did you never suspect?" Daniel's face remained composed, but something flickered in his eyes, a deep pain that he didn't try to hide. "If I had known," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "you wouldn't have had her. You'd have had me." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. But maybe that wouldn't have been better. The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. None of the girls spoke, processing the brutal honesty of his statement. He didn't try to defend himself or make excuses. He simply acknowledged the truth, that Elise's choice, as painful as it was, had given them something irreplaceable, a mother's undivided love and protection. Later that evening, as the rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, the girls gathered in the lounge. Celine and Mira shared a large armchair, while Lily curled up on the floor with a throw pillow. They each held steaming mugs of tea, the same blend their mother used to make on rainy nights. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Ava joined them. She entered the room quietly, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, and settled into the corner of the sofa. No one commented on her presence, but the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly, becoming more complete. In the hallway, unnoticed by the girls, Daniel stood in the shadows. He watched them through the partially open door. 4 sisters, each carrying a piece of Elise within them. Ava's proud posture, Celine's gentle movements, Mira's thoughtful silence, and Lily's bright eyes. They sat together, not speaking, but sharing something deeper than words could express. The rain continued to fall outside, and somewhere in the house, a clock ticked steadily onward, marking time in this new chapter of their lives. The Saturday morning light filtered through the dusty attic windows, casting long shadows across stacked boxes and forgotten furniture. Mira moved carefully between the piles, her natural curiosity drawing her deeper into the maze of memories. Her fingers trailed along old picture frames and cardboard boxes until they brushed against something different. A trunk, solid and well-made, with brass fittings that still gleamed despite years of dust. She crouched down, wiping away the gray film with her sleeve. The label, written in familiar handwriting, made her heart skip. Elise. Private. "Hey," she called out, her quiet voice carrying through the attic stillness. "I found something." The other girls appeared between the stacks, drawn by the urgency in Mira's tone. They gathered around the trunk, studying the careful lettering of their mother's name. "Should we?" Lily asked, her young face uncertain. Ava knelt beside the trunk, running her fingers along the brass latch. "It's addressed to her, not us." "But she's gone," Celine said softly. "And we're here." Together, they managed to lift the heavy trunk, carrying it carefully down the narrow attic stairs. The wood creaked beneath their feet as they made their way to the sitting room, where morning sunlight streamed through tall windows. They set the trunk on the Persian rug, forming a circle around it. For a moment, no one moved to open it. The weight of what might be inside hung heavy in the air. Finally, Mira reached forward and lifted the latch. The lid opened with a gentle groan, releasing the faint scent of cedar and old paper. "Oh," Lily breathed. Inside, carefully organized, lay their childhood, pieces of it they'd never seen before. Journals bound in faded leather, stacks of photographs, and drawings they recognized as their own earliest attempts at art. Elise had saved everything. Celine lifted out a bundle of papers tied with blue ribbon. "Look at this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. A sealed envelope sat on top, labeled in their mother's elegant script. "For the girls, when they are with him." They heard footsteps in the doorway. Daniel stood there, watching them with an expression they couldn't quite read. None of them had noticed his approach. "May I?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the space beside them. After a moment's hesitation, Ava nodded. Daniel sat cross-legged on the rug, completing their circle around the trunk. Celine carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a collection of papers, some typed, others handwritten. As she began to read aloud, they realized what they were looking at: a map of their mother's secret life. The pages detailed everything: when and where she had lived while pregnant with each of them, how she had carefully constructed the stories of miscarriages, the remote locations where each girl was born. Names, dates, and places formed a complex web of deception, all designed to protect both them and Daniel. "June Rowley," Daniel read over their shoulders, his voice barely above a whisper. "The midwife." He shook his head slowly. "I never knew any of it." "You never questioned when she disappeared?" Ava asked, but the edge in her voice had softened. "I trusted her," Daniel replied simply. "When she said she needed time at her sister's, or was volunteering with troubled teens or caring for her aunt, I believed her. She never gave me reason not to." They continued reading, pieces falling into place like a puzzle they hadn't known they were solving. Each revelation brought gasps of recognition, places they remembered, moments that suddenly made sense. "This was where I learned to swim," Mira said, pointing to a mention of a coastal cottage. "I always thought it was a dream." "And this garden," Celine added, "where she taught me about flowers. It wasn't just weekend visits. She was living there, waiting for me to be born." Lily pulled out a stack of photographs, spreading them across the rug. Baby pictures, dozens of them, showing each girl at different ages. Some they recognized, others were completely new to them. Daniel reached for one, then hesitated, looking at the girls for permission. When no one objected, he picked up the photo. "This is you," he said to Ava, studying the image of a newborn with a shock of dark hair. "You have the same determined expression even now." A small laugh escaped Ava's lips, surprising everyone, including herself. Daniel reached for an empty photo album that had been tucked in the bottom of the trunk. "We should organize these," he said. "Label them properly." The girls began sorting through the photos, calling out dates and names as they remembered them. Daniel wrote careful labels beneath each one they placed in the album. "That's not me," Lily giggled, pointing to a photo Daniel had just labeled. "That's Celine. Look at the birthmark on her shoulder." No, Mira interrupted, laughing. "That's definitely me. Remember that horrible yellow dress Aunt June made us all wear for photos? I was the only one who didn't cry in it." They worked through the stack, each photo bringing new memories, new connections. Even Ava joined in, correcting Daniel's guesses about which baby was which, sharing small details she remembered about certain outfits or locations. The morning light shifted to afternoon as they pieced together their shared history. What had started as a trunk full of secrets transformed into something else: a bridge between their separate pasts, connecting them all to the careful plans of a mother who had loved them enough to live two lives. Daniel labeled another photo, smiling as Lily corrected his guess about the date. The girls' laughter filled the room, no longer strained or cautious, but genuine and warm. Together, they continued sorting through the memories, each one helping to complete the picture of a family that was broken but not beyond repair. Sunday morning arrived with sheets of rain drumming against the estate's windows. The storm painted everything in muted grays and silvers, turning the manicured gardens into a glistening wonderland. Inside, the girls had scattered throughout the house. Mira curled up with a book by the window, Lily practicing piano scales, Celine organizing her mother's old sheet music, and Ava sketching in her usual corner of the sitting room. Daniel stood in the doorway of his study, watching the rain cascade down the glass. A memory of Elise dancing in similar weather tugged at his heart. He cleared his throat softly, drawing the attention of his daughters. "Would anyone like to go for a drive?" he asked, his voice careful and measured. "There's a bookstore in town I think you might enjoy. Maybe we could stop for ice cream too." Mira's head popped up from behind her book immediately, eyes bright with interest. Lily abandoned her piano practice, practically bouncing off the bench. "Can we really?" "In this weather?" Ava asked, not looking up from her sketchbook. "The rain makes everything more interesting," Daniel replied simply. Celine glanced between her sisters, clearly torn between staying dry and joining what could be an important family moment. Finally, she gave a small nod. "I'll go." Ava sighed, closing her sketchbook. "Fine, but I'm bringing my supplies." They piled into Daniel's car, the rain creating a cozy drum against the roof. The younger girls claimed the back seat, while Celine sat in the middle row. Ava took the passenger seat, though she angled herself toward the window. As they drove through town, Daniel slowed near a small flower shop with a striped awning. Recognition flickered across his face. Without explanation, he pulled over and stepped out into the rain, jogging toward the shop's entrance. "What's he doing?" Lily asked, pressing her face against the window. They watched as Daniel emerged a few minutes later with a bouquet of white tulips, perfectly wrapped in brown paper. Water droplets sparkled on his suit jacket as he slipped back into the driver's seat. "These," he said, carefully separating 5 pristine tulips from the bunch, "were your mother's favorite." He handed one to each girl, keeping one for himself. "She used to leave them as messages." "Messages?" Mira asked, gently touching the delicate petals. Daniel smiled, a distant look in his eyes. "We had our first real fight about 6 months after we started dating. I was working too much, missing dinners. The next morning I found a single white tulip under my windshield wiper. No note, just the flower." He twirled his tulip between his fingers. "It became our thing after that. A peace offering. A reminder." The girls studied their flowers in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Even Ava's expression softened as she traced the tulip's stem with her fingertip. At the bookstore, they scattered like leaves in the wind. Mira disappeared into the poetry section, while Lily explored children's books. Celine browsed sheet music, and Ava found herself in art history. Daniel wandered slowly, giving them space while staying within sight. "Daniel?" Mira's quiet voice caught his attention. She stood holding a worn volume of poetry, its spine cracked and pages yellowed. "Mom used to quote from this one. I recognized some of the lines." He took the book carefully, opening to a random page. His breath caught slightly as he recognized Elise's favorite passage, marked with a faint pencil line. Without hesitation, he closed the book and handed it back to Mira. "It's yours." Back at the estate, the rain continued its steady pattern against the windows. They gathered in the living room, drawn to the warmth of the fireplace. Daniel sat in his usual chair, while the girls arranged themselves on the nearby sofa. For the first time, they didn't maintain their usual careful distance. Mira read aloud from her new book, her voice soft but steady. Celine hummed quietly to herself, working on a piece of embroidery she'd found in Elise's trunk. Lily lay on her stomach, drawing patterns on a notepad, while Ava continued work in her sketchbook, though her rigid posture had relaxed slightly. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Outside, the rain created a gentle backdrop to their quiet activities. The atmosphere felt different, less strained, more natural. "You're different than I imagined," Lily suddenly whispered to Daniel, her young face serious in the firelight. Daniel looked at her, surprise and something deeper crossing his features. "So are you," he replied softly. The evening passed in comfortable quiet, broken only by the occasional turn of a page or scratch of pencil on paper. As night fell, they gradually drifted toward their rooms, carrying their tulips like precious treasures. Daniel made his usual evening rounds, checking each door. Lily's room was dark, soft breathing indicating she'd fallen asleep reading again. Mira's light was off, though he could see her poetry book on the nightstand. Celine's door was closed, classical music playing faintly from within. When he reached Ava's room, he noticed light spilling from beneath the door. He started to turn away, not wanting to intrude, when her voice stopped him. "Good night, Daniel." A small smile touched his lips as he closed her door quietly. "Good night, Ava," he whispered back. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost cruel. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving behind a pristine blue sky that contrasted sharply with the heavy atmosphere inside the estate. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast room, where Daniel and his daughters gathered for their final morning together. The dining table was set with the same care as previous days, fresh fruit, warm pastries, and steaming coffee. But something felt different. Unfinished. The weight of their impending departure hung over them like an invisible cloud. Ava sat at her usual place, pushing a piece of toast around her plate without eating. Her sisters exchanged worried glances, noting how she hadn't touched her coffee, the first time since their arrival that she'd refused the morning ritual she shared with Daniel. "Does anyone need help packing?" Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral as he poured more coffee into his cup. Lily shook her head, mouth full of pastry. Mira mumbled something about being mostly ready, while Celine focused intently on stirring her tea. Ava remained silent, her eyes fixed on something distant beyond the window. After breakfast, while her sisters went upstairs to finish gathering their belongings, Ava slipped away from the group. Her footsteps were nearly silent as she made her way to Daniel's study, clutching an unopened envelope in her hands. It was the last of Elise's letters, the only one she hadn't read. The study door closed behind her with a soft click. Ava stood in the center of the room, surrounded by dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal on the envelope. She unfolded the letter, recognizing her mother's elegant handwriting immediately. The words seemed to blur before focusing. "My dearest Ava, there are truths we carry like stones in our pockets, heavy but necessary. You deserve to know yours. During a difficult time, when Daniel was overseas handling a business crisis, we were briefly separated. You were conceived during this period. You were born of pain, but raised in love. You are his in every way that matters." Ava's legs gave way, and she sank into one of the leather chairs. Her vision blurred with tears as she continued reading, each word confirming what she'd somehow always suspected. Why she looked different from her sisters. Why her birthday never quite aligned with the timeline she'd pieced together. Outside, she could hear her sister's laughter floating up from the garden. The sound felt distant, as if coming from another world. She sat there, reading and rereading the letter until the sunlight shifted across the room. In the early afternoon, Ava found Daniel in his office. He was organizing some papers, probably trying to keep busy during these final hours. She stood in the doorway, letter clutched in her hand, until he noticed her presence. Without a word, she held out the letter. Daniel took it carefully, as if handling something fragile. His eyes moved across the pages, and Ava watched his expression change. Not surprise, but a deep sadness tinged with understanding. When he finished, he looked up at her, waiting. "Then it's true," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not really your daughter." Daniel set the letter down and walked to the fireplace mantel. He picked up a silver-framed photograph of Elise, one Ava had noticed several times during their stay. In it, Elise was laughing, her head thrown back, caught in a moment of pure joy. He crossed the room and placed the frame in Ava's hands. "Your mother knew I would love you, no matter what," he said, his voice steady and sure. "So I do. No conditions." Ava stared at the photograph, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. She could see pieces of herself in Elise's face, the same slight tilt to their eyes, the same way their lips curved when trying not to smile. The afternoon passed in a blur of goodbyes and packing. Ava moved through it all in a daze, her mind still processing everything she'd learned. Her sisters noticed her distraction but didn't press, perhaps sensing she needed space with her thoughts. As evening settled over the estate, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, Ava found herself drawn to the living room. Daniel sat on the couch, a book open in his lap, though he didn't appear to be reading it. She crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and sat beside him. For a moment, they sat in silence, the tick of the grandfather clock the only sound in the room. Then, slowly, Ava leaned into Daniel's side, resting her head against his shoulder. Without hesitation, Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, the touch gentle, undemanding. It wasn't a fix for everything, but it was a beginning. Tuesday morning arrived with a gentle warmth that seemed to slow everything down. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, casting golden squares on the hardwood floor where Daniel stood, his coffee mug warming his hands. Through the window, he watched the girls moving back and forth from the house to the car, their movements unhurried despite the inevitable departure. Lily sat cross-legged on the front steps, carefully wrapping a small pottery piece Daniel had given her in yesterday's newspaper. Celine helped Mira fold a blanket they'd found in the library, one that still carried Elise's perfume. Ava stood by the car, organizing bags with the same careful precision she brought to her sketches. Daniel took another sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground him in the moment. The weekend had transformed his empty house into something alive, filled with whispers and footsteps and the occasional burst of laughter. The thought of it returning to silence made his chest tighten. Mira came into the kitchen, her quiet presence announced only by the soft pad of her sock-covered feet. She headed for the dining room, probably looking for her book of poetry, when she stopped suddenly. On the polished mahogany table sat a small velvet box, deep blue and slightly worn at the edges. "Daniel," she called softly, her voice carrying just enough to bring him from the kitchen. "There's something here." He set his coffee down and moved to her side. The box looked familiar, something from Elise's collection of treasured items. His name was written across the top in her distinctive handwriting, the letters flowing with her characteristic grace. With careful fingers, Daniel lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in faded silk, lay a smooth river stone. The surface had been carefully painted with words in Elise's hand. "For the life we couldn't share. Raise it now." The other girls had drifted in, drawn by the quiet intensity of the moment. They gathered around the table, forming a loose circle as Daniel held the stone in his palm. "I know where this belongs," he said softly, looking at each of them in turn. "Will you help me?" They followed him through the French doors and into the garden, Elise's garden. The morning sun had burned away the dew, leaving the air fresh and clean. Daniel led them past the herb beds and rose bushes to a small clearing near the rose arbor. The spot had been recently cleared of weeds, The dark soil turned and prepared. "Your mother loved cherry blossoms," Daniel explained, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "She used to say they were nature's way of celebrating secrets finally told." He gestured to the prepared earth. "I thought we could plant one here. One petal for each year kept silent, and each year ahead of us." Lily's eyes brightened with understanding. "A memory tree," she whispered. Daniel nodded, moving to a nearby shed. He returned with several garden spades and a young cherry blossom sapling in a pot. The tree was small but healthy, its branches reaching upward with promise. They worked together, taking turns digging the hole deeper. The physical labor seemed to break something open between them. Celine laughed when soil sprayed across her shirt. Mira quoted a line about gardens from her poetry book. Lily hummed a tune that sounded remarkably like one of Elise's favorite songs. Ava worked steadily, her movements precise and purposeful. When the hole was deep enough, she held out her hand for the riverstone. Daniel placed it in her palm, watching as she knelt and carefully positioned it at the bottom of the hole. "Now it'll grow with her," Lily said softly, touching one of the sapling's delicate branches. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, the final note he'd found tucked inside the velvet box. His voice was clear in the morning air as he read, "They are yours. In heart, in memory, in every future they choose to give you." Together, they lifted the sapling from its pot and lowered it into the prepared earth. Each of them took turns adding soil around the roots, patting it firm with careful hands. When the last of the dirt was in place, Daniel stepped back, placing his hand on the slender trunk. One by one, the girls stepped forward, adding their hands to his. They stood in silence around the newly planted tree, connected by touch to something that would grow with their own growing understanding. The morning breeze rustled through the leaves above them, and for a moment, it carried the ghost of Elise's laughter. Wednesday morning arrived with an unusual stillness. The girls' bags sat packed by the front door of Daniel's estate, but no one moved to load them into the waiting car. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor where four sisters stood, each finding reasons to delay their departure. Lily pretended to double-check her backpack for the third time, methodically removing and replacing each item. Mira traced patterns in the dust motes dancing through the sunbeams. Celine kept smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her sweater. Ava stood with her arms crossed, watching the grandfather clock tick away precious minutes. Daniel observed them from the doorway of his study, his own reluctance to see them leave evident in the way he lingered, straightening papers that were already neat, adjusting picture frames that didn't need adjusting. The silence stretched until Celine cleared her throat softly. Daniel?" Her voice carried the slight tremor of uncertainty. When he turned to face her, she continued, "I was wondering, we were wondering." She glanced at her sisters for support before pressing on. "Could we maybe come back next weekend?" Daniel's response was immediate, his usual careful consideration abandoned in favor of instant certainty. "Yes," he nodded, relief visible in the softening of his shoulders. "Yes, of course." Mira stepped forward then, her quiet voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I've been thinking about my room." She paused, correcting herself. "The guest room, the one I stayed in." Her fingers twisted together nervously. "There's this garden I love, with all these different flowers. I thought maybe, if it's okay, we could paint it like that." Daniel's eyes brightened with interest. "What colors would you need?" he asked, already reaching for a notepad on the nearby console table. Encouraged by his response, Mira's words tumbled out faster. "Well, there's this specific shade of purple from the irises, and the soft pink of the peonies, and this really pretty butter yellow from the daffodils." She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about her enthusiasm. "Write them all down," Daniel encouraged, holding out the notepad. "We'll get every color exactly right." Lily, who had been watching this exchange with growing excitement, suddenly darted to her backpack. She pulled out her sketchbook, flipping through pages until she found what she was looking for. With hesitant steps, she approached Daniel. "Mom used to have these beautiful birdhouses in her garden," she said softly, showing him a detailed drawing. "She told me once that she made them with her father. I drew this one from memory." The sketch showed a charming wooden structure with intricate details carved into its roof. Daniel studied the drawing carefully, his finger tracing the pencil lines. "Would you like to build one together?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lily's face lit up. "Really? You know how?" "I can learn," Daniel replied with a small smile. "We can figure it out together." Ava, who had remained silent through these exchanges, suddenly moved. She reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a slightly crumpled form. Walking to where Daniel stood, she held it out without a word. Daniel took the paper, recognizing it as a school document. His eyes found the empty space where parent-guardian name should be filled in. He looked up at Ava, meeting her steady gaze. "Can I put you down?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything those simple words meant. Without hesitation, Daniel reached for the pen in his breast pocket. His handwriting was clear and deliberate as he filled in the blank space. Daniel Hart, father. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't seek permission. The certainty in his action said everything that needed to be said. Ava took the form back, her fingers brushing against his briefly. She nodded once, tucking the paper carefully into her bag. The moment stretched between them all, full of unspoken understanding. Then, as if responding to some silent signal, the girls began picking up their bags, not to leave, but to carry them back upstairs. They moved through the hallway with new purpose. Lily skipped ahead, already talking about where they could put the birdhouse once it was built. Mira followed more slowly, lost in thoughts of flower colors and paint swatches. Celine walked with lighter steps, humming softly under her breath. Ava paused at the foot of the stairs, looking back at Daniel. No words passed between them, but something shifted in her expression. A softening around the eyes, a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. Through the grand window beside them, the morning sun illuminated the newly planted cherry blossom tree in the garden. Its young branches swayed gently in the breeze, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Beneath its roots, invisible but present, lay the smooth river stone with its message from Elise. "For the life we couldn't share, raise it now." The girls disappeared up the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the house, not as visitors anymore, but as something more permanent, more real. The sound of their voices drifted down, discussing room colors and weekend plans, filling the once quiet spaces with new life. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel and his daughters, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel and his daughters, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.